was prepared in a different format some time ago, so I've added to it the photographs. I'm no photographer, but once you've got a good cell phone, almost anybody can take a photograph. So there's a mixture of pictures here from friends Pam Cook and Jeff Nichols, and gradually I've added to it. The plants I'm going to show you today are not necessarily the best, or the most obvious ones. They're the ones for which I have photographs. But what I'm trying to do is to give you, to encourage everybody, when you're thinking of gardening, any gardening, but particularly in this case, indigenous gardening, people tend to think trees first. And in any suburban garden, you should not have more than 3 trees, big trees. And remember, in Durban, or along the coast, your trees are growing, on average, 1.5 meters a year. So in no time you've got shade, and then everybody complains, I haven't got any color in my garden, and that's because you've got too much shade. So what we're trying to do is encourage people. We've been working on this big indigenous gardening book. It only comes out in 2025, but we've got a separate section. We have trees, large shrubs and small trees, and that's what we're talking about today, is shrubs and small trees. The color doesn't always show up too well. Most of you probably know the bush violet, Valeria, which you might not think of as a shrub, but it is a low-growing shrub, or it will scramble if it's got something to scramble on, and it can be trained into a hedge. This is the hybrid, but even the pure species can be. The hybrid will have a few flowers throughout the year. It'll either grow up and you can prune it as a hedge, or it'll go down and cover a local stone wall. Whereas the bush violet does the same. It'll stretch, and some people won't plant them because they say they produce too many seedlings. It's very easy to weed out a seedling. So don't do yourself out of this beautiful autumn flowering plant because you don't want to weed out the seedlings. Valeria stellata, that's the plant. It actually doesn't occur, it won't be in my flower book. It's an Mpumalanga plant. It's a bushveld plant. It grows incredibly dry, semi-shade, but we use it a lot down the south coast at Renishaw and at Widdenham, but particularly Renishaw. And there I discovered it hates water. So do not overwater it. It likes to be dry. Some of ours looking beautiful against a grey wall. This lovely dark grey wall with almost silver leaf. We had a big storm and the water sat at it literally sat in water for just a day. It killed them all instantly. So don't look after it too much. That's the flower.
Do you mind if I interrupt?
Yeah.
Should one prune the great flower?
You know what, the bush tick berry is something I sort of warn people about, but it has to be there. If you're at the coast, it'll take the full blast of the sea wind, it'll grow on the main dunes, which is where it occurs naturally. You also get another subspecies in the Drakensberg, which is smaller and more sort of silvery. I did plant some on a loffelstone, a huge loffelstone contraption in a development in Cubby's Hill. And I hate to tell you that it's now found almost all over Cubby's Hill. The birds love it. So it's called the bush tick berry because it's a daisy that gets a berry, and it looks like a tick. It can be eaten, it's delicious. Here, because I'm hoping we can encourage growers to grow it. We used to get it from Ian Garland and from the nursery at Twin Streams. It's a shrub that grows about, I have one in my garden, it's my height, that wide, but it has been there 20 years. It's normally about that height. There's no flower to speak of, but it always has these orange leaves, silver under the leaf, and it's a really neat, beautiful shade plant. Does really well in the shade. Very, very attractive shape. And I think if enough people ask for it, we might get people growing it for us. You might not think of Crassula ovata as being a shrub, but in a Durban Game Reserve, where it grows wild, it is a tree. It grows 4 meters tall with a stem like that. And most people know it as almost a container plant or garden plant, but it can get really big. And the trick with using shrubs is to get a combination of different textures and different colors of the leaves, so that whether or not they're flowers, you've still got an interesting plant. The Desotis. Some, I I see that the Sotus Princeps is available. I can't show you the flower. It gets the most beautiful big purple flower. It's a South African version of a Tibashina. Tibashina is from South America. The Sotus Princeps will make a small tree up to 3 meters. The Sotus canescens grows in water, and I've grown it in a pot standing in water at the Croc Center at St. Lucia. It was in that pot for 18 years until a new manager arrived and decided they didn't need it anymore. But we just planted it in clay in a wet pot, but I've had it in gardens and I use it in rehabilitation. It's a natural wetland plant from here right up past Pietermaritzburg. Terrible picture. What you can't see there's a little blue flower, Discarista rogersii. It's famous for butterflies. It's a wonderful butterfly attracting plant. It makes a bush. It only grows about waist high. This comes, it's not our local one. We do get a local one in Natal, but ours is even smaller. This is from the Limpopo area. The one that most people know has got a big flower. It looks like a Valeria, but it comes from Uganda. So I'm afraid I don't recommend it to you, but if you're not too fussy, it's also a great, tough, nearly indigenous plant, an African indigenous plant.
Is that the Discarista tamburgifolia?
You're probably all familiar with the Euryops. We get about 7 Euryops species which make wonderful garden plants. The common garden one in this area, which literally can be considered a weed, is Euryops chrysanthemoides. It grows taller, it has much brighter green leaf. This leaf is greyish, but that plant lived in that situation, surrounded by paving, I don't know, 12, 15 years.
Is that being pruned to be around?
No, just like that. Pedunculata keeps a very, it keeps its, no, if you buy a good specimen, if the specimen you buy from the nursery is sort of like this, that's how it will grow. Then treat it as if it's Japanese. You've got a bit of ikebana. It can still look lovely. But I think if you get a good straight specimen, when it's this size, a single stem, and it's round, that's what you'll get. And it's rewarding, it flowers, and it's tough, it'll go on for years. There are others, they're just difficult in the nurseries. This is the one that most nurseries will keep. I'm not sure who's selling this. We used to be able to buy it at the nursery at Crop World, but I suspect others have it. It's a euphorbia, and it's a form plant. It gets a little bunch of yellow flowers. You don't plant it for the flowers. And when it starts lying around, it means it's getting too big. Cut it right back, and then you'll get this lovely effect. Very effective in a garden. Comptococcus bishop's balls. It's a great butterfly plant. Floral artists like to use the inflated fruits, but the butterflies are attracted to the flowers, and then the larvae, the caterpillars, will grow on the plant, but it looks lovely. Just again, if you're a farmer and it's on your floodplain or in your fields, you call it a weed. But in a garden, you have a couple of them. One plant is beautiful. It'll get about that size, and it's just really delightful. We used to see this quite a lot. I haven't had a chance yet to really look at what's available for sale. It's gone for stigma. Sorry, we've tried to give everything a common name, but I must have run out of time. On the right is how it grows. It grows in rivers in the Drakensberg and in Lesotho, and that's the flower. It has this lovely grey look. It grows in perfectly dry, hot clay or sandy soil in your garden and looks very pretty. So if ever you see it, try it, but don't quite take one plant. You'll need 3 or 4 because they don't bulk up a lot. Grow about that tall, about that wide, but because it's quite a slender leaf, you want a few together to have an impact. I don't know about all of you, but to me, grey in the garden is really helpful in contrast with everything else that you've got with all the greens. So here's another one. There was some of this available at the plant fair, the poplar helichrysum. It doesn't get any, the flower it gets is completely forgettable. In fact, I tend to cut it off. But that leaf is at least this big. It's a magnificent plant. It'll grow. It'll eventually get to about my height and about that width. It's a sandstone endemic from Orrery Gorge down to Port St. John's sort of area. I think you might get some of the cliffs in Carlskloof, but it's a fantastic plant. My problem is getting enough of it. I only know one nursery growing it, and they don't often have it, but there were some here, they're probably really gone.
They grow in shade?
Yes, they actually naturally grow in shade. Now, dappled shade is better, but it'll grow in the shade. Again, it's quite happy to be dry. This is my friend Elizabeth Forstick's garden, where we rehabilitated and made a garden some years ago, but the beach is literally 100 meters away. This is another helichrysum. This is decorum. You get many of this yellow helichrysum. You see them on the roadsides. People might think because they're common that it's a weed. It's not a weed. It is just a plant that's growing really well. The leaf is grey, the flower is yellow. It stays in flower for a couple of months. It does die back. When it dies back, cut it back because it will have seeded itself. And you can see there, we've allowed it to grow into the grassland. But I collect seed and plant it in any new area where I'm working if there's enough space. Otherwise, one plant in the garden, same thing, weed it out of it too many. Very rewarding. And if you want to, the flowers, the everlasting, cut them, dry them upside down, and they'll last literally, the Afrikaans name is a sewejalkie. They say they last 7 years. I can tell you they last at least 7 years if you dry them out. Just hang them upside down until they're dry. And they're beautiful, they keep the yellow color. The only picture I've got of this, and I've got another one that's very similar. All these synchronistemons, sagebush, they are all very pretty, and unfortunately, with the lights on, even with the lights off, I don't think we get the color. Sorry, the hibiscus. There is another sagebush coming. I thought I had them in order. So I'll come back to the other sagebush in a minute. There is hibiscus pedunculatus. The pink, forest pink hibiscus is available for sale here. It will grow in deep shade. It naturally occurs in forest. It grows in deep shade. It grows normally about that high. I have got some that high. Keep cutting them. If you leave them, they grow. It's a single thing and it'll have quite a few flowers. If you cut them, it'll bush. I took a very bad picture, so I couldn't use it. I saw a landscaper use them at the quarry at Hilton. She planted them in a line about that wide in a bed. She did stake them, and they were in full sun, and you couldn't put a pin between the flowers. The flower's quite big, big pink flower. It's really beautiful. So I could recommend it. Even if you've only got room for one, it's worth doing it. And once you've got it, it does produce seed, not too many seed.
And does it flower well in the shade?
Yes, it's still, in my garden, I've got too much shade, but mine are doing really well in the deep shade. It's a natural forest plant, but it will do in the sun. Yeah, definitely useful for shady coastal gardens. And then the ribbon bush, gardeners might be familiar with it. That doesn't show you as pretty as it is. It's a delightful bush. It's tough as old boots. It takes shade, but in shade it gets quite tall and it doesn't flower quite so well, so it's better in the sun. You often get it in damp areas, but it'll grow anywhere, anytime, but do cut it back every year to get a nice bush and plenty of flowers. But having said that, I remember when the Gardener magazine was still being given to you for free. I don't know if anybody here remembers that. It's a long time ago. The man who funded it, I don't remember who he is, but he had open garden at Kloof, and he was growing it as a shade plant. He never cut it back. It was growing shoulder height, and he had a big piece of it, sort of half the size of this room, and sort of correctly placed in his garden. It looked outstanding, and he said when it flowered it was also beautiful, but there was more bush than flower. I tend to want more flower than bush. Choice is yours. And I'm giving you two pictures of Leonotis, the wild ducker. We have 3 species that are useful in the garden. One is very weedy. The weedy one is very spiky, flowers throughout the year, and makes 1 million babies. If you have a huge garden, by all means have it, but otherwise don't, take it out. Use this one, which I don't have the clip ducker. The clip ducker has a broad leaf, flowers 2 months before this one, so you need both of them in the garden. And if they get really tall, stake them, because the wind will blow them over. But I mean, my office looks onto that variegated strawberry I spoke of, and I've got these in them. And literally there was a sunbird in every flower right through this winter. Just fantastic.
And if you cut them back, they have a second flower.
Yes, what we discovered on the beachfront when we were doing for the World Cup, we cut them back by 1/3 when they finish, and then they'll flower again in October, November. Correct, yes. Otherwise, but then after that, cut them right down. If you don't cut them right down, they get too slim, and then the wind batters them around. That's just showing how we use them in the garden. This is up in the Drakensberg. Okay, so this is a tree that makes a very good shrub. Because the tree in the wild, which is also sort of a ponderland endemic plant, tends to be bent. It's very rare you'll see it with a straight stem. And so it often has multi-stems. What you're seeing with the white, let's see if I can use this pointer. Those are the flowers, or the male flowers, and that's the female now setting seeds. So those are winged. The pink is winged. The new growth is a coppery color. So you have the coppery colored leaves, then you have the white and the pink flowers and seeds. It's an outstanding plant. It can handle frost. So they use it in Pretoria as a street tree. It's a coastal tree that they're using as a street tree because it can handle the frost, and it's beautiful. So we're using quite a bit at Woodland Retirement Village because it can handle the wind. So if you don't have one, I believe somebody, my supplier, was running short of them, and he said some landscaper up the north coast has suddenly discovered them. So now I'm competing for stock. Because not everybody's growing it, but it's a beautiful plant. Because of course, with that kind of winged seed, it's going to stay looking lovely for a very long time. You can't really see this too well. This is my Ochna natalitia, which you can see, that's been there about 15 years, and it's a good 3 meters, maybe a little taller, but definitely a tree. It's got 2 stems. I have a friend who had one, she's not here today, but she had hers much longer in Umkamas, and hers had a stem like that, so it can make a real tree. But for me, for the average garden, if you don't want a tree, just prune it, and it'll stay a bush.
Cerulata as well. Cerulata, Ochna cerulata.
Well, cerulata never gets so big.
No, it's about 3 meters.
So there are other Ochnas. All of them are wonderful. There are some for sale on the show. I think I've got a close-up of the seed. There we go. Because eventually, the actual seed, the drupe, ripens black. And those can still be on the plant when we get into December, so it makes quite a good Christmas decoration. But it's a delightful plant, and it can fit into any garden, small or large.
Sorry, Elsa. What is the difference between the cerulata and the natalitata?
Cerulata has a smaller leaf. It's a much neater plant. It can get as big, but it's much slower growing. So it's my choice for a small garden because it's slower growing and as pretty.
Than this one?
Absolutely, yeah. It's as pretty.
Because I have one, well, I've got a lot of small ones.
Yeah.
They look exactly like that. I mean, are they both exactly the same looking?
The flowers, all Ochna flowers, except Ochna pulchra, which you get in the high felt, it has a sort of greenish flower. All the others have a lovely bright yellow flower.
And the same berries, the same.
And yes, yeah. So the difference is really in the leaves.
Okay. So I need to note that. Because the Ochna it's quite big. It's been there a long time.
Yeah.
I always thought it was cerulata, but maybe it isn't.
Well, you said you've seen them at 3 meters. So they can make 3 meters. I've never seen one 3 meters tall. But it's possible.
So these are smaller, the leaves of the natalitata.
Cerulata has a smaller leaf.
Smaller leaf. Okay.
A narrower leaf
I
and a
think
bit
that's what I
shorter.
had.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So Plectranthus secundus, these are the spur flowers. I cut them back every year. This is a bit of my mixed shrubbery. And when you cut them back, every stick will grow, and it'll grow and give you a bush in time for the next season.
Right.
But a colleague of mine has left his to grow, and they will go up to 3 meters. So if you want to let them grow and grow, you can. It's still quite handsome. I just like the flowers, and if you let them grow that tall, you don't get as much flower for bush. So I like to cut them back and get more flowers.
There's a pink one as well.
I'm going to show you a pink one. You get this one, Eclonis comes in pink and white. Not as easy to get. And if you buy a fruticosus, you can't see it. This is actually pink. It's showing up lilac, but it's actually, the pictures on my computer is pink. So plectrans are spur flowers. If you haven't started with them, please explore them. You get them from little ones this size, the stoop jacaranda, which was a lot of people don't even realize it's indigenous because it's found in the stoops all over the country, is delightful and will flower almost throughout the year. But you have a whole range of them, and they're all easy to grow and really pretty, and tend to be autumn flowering. Some of them will flower in summer. In plumbago, it grows naturally on in the river valleys, certainly along the coast. And you do now get the royal blue, but this is how you would know it. I'd say it's a really tough, beautiful plant. But having said that, I'm working at 3 retirement villages, and at the one we're having real problems. Even though it likes to be hot and dry, we found that in winter it doesn't want to be too dry. Whereas the Cape honeysuckle, if it gets too much water, it turns up its toes. So you learn these things when you move it. But I want to show you what I saw with this, because this is grown all over the world, and nobody elsewhere in the world realizes it's South Africa. This is at the Forum in Rome, which is opposite the Colosseum, where they're still doing excavations. They've used it as a bedding plant. That is a sunken garden bed. You can't quite see it, but they planted it down, some white, some blue, and then they've put a deep maroon exotic plant. I can't think of it in amongst it. It's just too beautiful. Then also in Rome, I don't travel a lot, but my one son gave me a short trip to Rome when he was in Turkey. This is the same thing. You can tell by the dog cave. It was in a restaurant hanging over a balcony. And in fact, wherever you went, you saw it. Because, of course, they're hot and dry, aren't they? But they get icy cold in winter, and it survives that too. Okay, the shell bush. This gets a lovely pink flower. For those of you who don't know it, I should have brought some pieces here. I'll remember that. I'll do the talk again. I'll pick a few bits so you can see the real thing. I used to overlook it in gardens. I didn't like using it as a landscaper because I thought it was a bit boring. The flower is quite small, but it's reliable. And I prune it back. Well, I prune that bush in half. And it comes back fresh and green, and it flowers, for me it flowers almost throughout the year. And it will flower with no water, and it'll flower with water, but the main thing is I can put it with plumbago, and you get the pink and the blue, and it's an outstanding mix. And it's really tough. It's a good investment. I think they have it here. It's now changing its name. It's going to be a Cincolus Steeman, but don't worry, the old name will still be there. Okay, the September bush. Some of you know what I call polygala, what most people call polygala. If you can visualize what you can't see in the picture, it is covered in flowers the whole year round. I've just bought some from the Indigiflora, who've got some plants here. They have a pure white one. I normally don't like these sports, but this pure white against the dark green leaves is actually delightful. And then that grainy leaf one, just that they happen to have found. But I got a few of each, and they're in a construction yard at a building site, not a polygala in sight. And the bumblebees are there. You know, our bumblebee isn't a bumblebee, it's actually a carpenter bee. But they found it within a day of them getting there. How they found it, I have no idea. But they're famous for attracting the carpenter bees. It was just so exciting to see. So this is Vergata. Not many nurseries sell it because it doesn't do well in a bag. So if you know anybody who's got it in their garden, ask for one. They grow
vertical.
Yes. You know what? One nursery had them. So if anybody's got them, this is a tip. It has a single stem and then branches. what she said is put 3 close together and plait the stems. If you plait the stems, once they've grown up, they're strong enough to hold themselves without being staked. Really works, I've done it. And it has these, this doesn't show how beautiful it is, because that's a long stem, and it's covered with flowers, and it'll flower right through the summer. It is really lovely. More difficult to get. I think they might even have some here.
We do.
Oh, good, thank you. Because, well, if you see them here, take them, because there's very few nurseries that stock them, because they're difficult to manage in a bag.
But they don't grow so well if from the seed. They grow better if they drop their own seeds. That's what
Once you've got a plant in the garden, it will make babies. And what best thing is to leave the baby there if you can leave it, because it'll grow best like that. But I am picking them out and moving them and plaiting them, and it does work. Speckworm. I know speckworm has become very expensive to buy and difficult to get because it's supposed carbon fixing properties. I know it's useful in the Karoo, but the fact is we have many plants that can fix carbon just as well. Folks, it's just a wonderful plant in a garden. It's tough. It makes a great hedge if you want to trim it. You can trim it in a nice tight hedge. We're now growing it as a freestanding shrub this size. It looks magnificent in a garden. And but although it will grow from a cutting, it grows better from a rooted plant in a bag. We've just proven it. We've got Amanda Mapamula here, and she's my twin at Renishaw Hills. We do the gardens together. I designed them, she installs them. And we were just looking at them yesterday. The nursery managed to give us specimens about that high, where we were trying to make it a short hedge, and it has grown beautifully. And we've used lots of cuttings, and none of them work as well. So if you can get them with roots attached, do. But they will grow from a cutting. That's on the beachfront, and they're doing really well. Pictus stachys, the hedgehogs, the 2 different species. This obviously has a brighter blue flower. They are both amazing, but in a garden you need to put them, I'm treating it as a shrub, although this is the one that gets taller. Put it at the back. My mother, who died in 1988 in her 80s, grew indigenous plants and everything, all other plants as well, way before it became something that people did. And she always had it in her garden, but always at the back of a bed, because it gets very tall. So if you have it in the front, it's going to hide everything else. But that blue is outstanding. It doesn't, you can see the quality of the blue. I can't give you, I don't have a picture that shows you just how beautiful it is in the garden. Lots and lots of succulents, and I see there are lots of succulents available. This, we used to call it Senecio azoides. It's now Curio talanoides subspecies azoides. We've now given it the name narrow-leaved chalk sticks, which grows as a shrub. It gets up to this height, up to 1 meter on its own. If it's leaning on something, get taller. The broad-leaved chalk sticks is a ground cover, and it's almost a blue-grey. Very different. I think they're both available here. They both, the flowers are different. You wouldn't plant them for the flower, but that grey in the garden is very attractive, and they're pretty tough. And this is the others, this is still a Senecio for now, and it will grow at least 1 meter tall on its own and gets a lovely yellow flower. This is quite sharp, and a lovely smell, smells of honey. But give it a tree or a shrub or a hedge, a fence, and it'll climb. Also a very reliable plant. Okay, I couldn't resist putting this in. I've already told you the story. I do use it as a shrub because it makes this broad bush and the leaves are really beautiful. So whether or not it's got flowers, it has beautiful leaves with that red main vein in them. So consider it not, well, what else would you call it if it's not a shrub? We've had to put it in the perennials, but a perennial covers such a wide range of things, anything from a little ground cover daisy up to that. So for this talk, it's a shrub.
So, how do you propagate the strelitzia?
Seed.
Seed.
You can separate them. If you have a big plant, you can separate them, but it'll start for at least a year before it gives you flowers again.
And the monkeys eat those seeds.
Well, the monkeys, if you have a lot of monkeys, I'm afraid I disapprove terribly if anybody feeds monkeys, but if anybody near you feeds monkeys, you have a problem. So I know the nursery at Crockwell has a problem that the monkeys rip the flowers, never mind the seeds. They don't worry about the seeds, they're ripping the flowers. And there's a couple of Widdenham who've just planted, they bought 2 plants from me, already with flowers. They thought long and hard because they were big, expensive plants. They've got a small place, they put the flowers in. The next day, they're right on the boundary with Widdenham village. The next day, the monkeys came in and ripped them out. So some advice I've given others, so I don't know, I'm not watching my time. I hope you're not, if you need to go, just go. No, that's another story. So this is the other pink plume. It's also Salvia family, and that is a brilliant pink bush. And we should have it in every garden. Do you have some here, James?
No, we don't have.
You don't have this one. Do you have any Synchronocebus?
No, afraid we don't.
Okay.
Thanks.
This one grows very easy from cuttings, so I've got to find a nursery who will grow it, because I've got big bush. I'm waiting to turn them into cuttings, but I don't have time. I'll find somebody who'll do it. So one of the nurseries, generally I got these in the past from Alex Mark, which is in Corsi Nursery, up in Howick, long way to go. But some of the things we haven't naturally got at the coast, and yet it does very well at the coast. In fact, I think this species is a coastal one. We all know the Cape honeysuckle, and so there you can't really see the colour there, the yellow and the red or orange, and you get this, what I call a champagne colour. The advantage of this, it makes a hedge, it makes a screen, you've got your nectar-loving birds in it all the time, and it generally flowers almost throughout the year. I've also used it as a bedding plant. I keep it cut to knee height in a flower bed, and it keeps it in flower almost throughout the year. It gets completely covered in flower. Just keep cutting it. And I know Amanda's the one, she's managing the team who does it, and if there's one flower, they don't want to cut it. And I get mad. You've got to cut it. When the main flowering is over, cut it back, and then it'll flower and you'll get the full flush. So there are different ways in which you can use these shrubs. If you want to let them go wild, they'll go climb up a tree, they'll do many things. I find the yellow one doesn't grow as, it's not as robust. Not as robust as, so it'll keep its shape and size better.
Can they handle shade as well?
They'll flower, but everything, even shade plants, actually flower better with a bit of sun. I don't think they'll do well in the deep shade. I don't think they'll flower for you. But so long as they get some sun, you'll still get flowers. Tephrosia, I can't show this to you except to say, and I can't remember what the common name is. Sorry, I've got to learn the common names. It does have one.
I think it's the pink bush tea.
That's right. Yeah. I was wanting to. I was actually late this morning trying to put the common names in. It's very tough. You will see it on roadsides where you might think it's a weed, but it's a wonderful garden plant. It grows about that high, makes a bush about that wide. It's covered in flowers. You're only just seeing 2 flowers, and that's quite a big pink flower. It's a wonderful plant if you can get it. If you can't see it, if you can't buy it, and you see it on the side, is it here? Yay, James, thank you. Going to be running up. Because I was going to say, if you can't buy it and you see it on the side of the road, collect seed, not the plant, collect seed because it grows fairly quickly. But most of us don't want to wait for seed.
It's a leguminous, isn't it?
Yes. Pea family. So the Turia. I don't know the common name of this either. Do we have any of these on sale? This is a really lovely plant, and it grows at the coast. It will grow quite tall, but as I know from the bushveld, it wouldn't get higher than my shoulder, and it's often less than that. It's these beautiful, pure white flowers. Quite a big flower.
But it's got no scent.
Sorry?
No scent. That one doesn't have a scent. The other one
no
does.
seeds, yes. Yeah. So I think you said no seeds.
No scent.
And so it'll flower right through the summer, and it's a delightful plant. It can handle shade. On the coast, in fact, the coastal one gets a bigger flower than the bushveld one. It's the same species, but it's often found in the shade.
Also, mine's gone very leggy. Would you advise pruning it as well?
It's funny, I haven't seen it, but actually in the dune forest it gets leggy. But you can certainly cut it back. Then get more flowers.
Yeah, that's why I'm
Yeah.
just
So it has a cousin, which I couldn't put in here because it's definitely a tree. The Turia floribunda has the most heavenly scent. If you want a beautiful scent in the garden, it's the springtime one. It's not throughout the summer, but it is, and it has a fascinating flower. It's a sort of silvery green, but it gets completely covered. And if you don't, you might not even see the flowers, but you will smell the tree. Follow your nose, you will see it. Do you have that available?
No.
You don't often see that.
I've got one in my garden.
Yeah, but I'm thinking in terms of buying it. But still, we start with knowing what it is. This is, strictly speaking, considered a tree. So I'm pushing it to call it a shrub, but it's a multi-stemmed small tree. And the scent of the flowers is outstanding. To me, they smell like violets. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to have grown up smelling violets. Violets have a beautiful scent. That's what these have. And it gets masses of them. When it flowers, it's a spring flower, and it gets masses of them. In the Bohemias, Pride of Dakar, that gets enormous. And I've actually used it over a pergola. I've taken it up and it's covered a pergola. It will lean on something, grow on a fence. If you want to maintain it, I've got somebody who came down from the Highveld, and in her entirely indigenous garden with no lawn at all, just everything plants, she bought 12 of them, and she has a tiny garden. I said, "You've got too many." She didn't believe me. Anyway, they've now got quite big. So I told her I'd seen them at Kailami in Johannesburg, but never photographed them. They pollarded them. They literally took all the lower stems off, have made one single stem, and then they have this lovely bush hanging over. So she's done it. The next time I do a slideshow, I'll get a picture of it. You can manage it in a small garden if you really want to, otherwise a big garden plant. Bohemia natalensis is absolutely delightful. It's a very delicate little flower, and it is Natal coast, quite dry, at the handle semi-shade. It's never flowered a lot for me, so I now use the hybrid. But I've spoken to other people who don't like the hybrid. They say this flower is better. In Johannesburg, if anybody knows Random Harvest Nursery, they have the most incredible indigenous nursery, and they have houses that are cottages to rent, you know, bed and breakfast type thing. She's made a hedge. I was so envious. I was there in about, I suppose, September now, and there was this hedge shoulder high, about that wide. She hadn't trimmed it. It was just a loosely grown hedge. Must have run from here to across there, covered in flowers, completely covered in flowers. So it grows in the Highveld, comes from the Natal coast. So I encourage you to try it, because I do have one in my garden. I enjoy it. It's almost like a miniature azalea with this red streak in it. And then this is the yellow one, which I love. Yellow, and when it dies, it turns a sort of mauvey color. You must keep cutting it, because if you don't, it's going to be a branch here and a branch there. I cut it until I've got a tight bush. And I've got one that I planted too close to my entrance gate to my house. So I now cut it, and it looks like, the leaves have got smaller. It looks like it looks like wallpaper. It's literally, you can sort of touch it. I mean, it's flat, but it still flowers. So that one definitely benefits from cutting. So this is the hybrid, the Bohemia natom. And I saw the guy who developed it. He's actually got breeding rights on it. And I've been using it everywhere and recommending it to people. I said, "Why have you never got it?" And he said, "No." I said, "It doesn't make enough flowers." So I said, "But I'm using it and telling people to use it. It doesn't make enough flowers if we don't prune it." This gives you an idea of the flower. It's a hybrid between the natom, at least with the natalensis and the tomentosa. So it's a creamy white, but a big flower. That's my plant there next to a Macaya Bella. And that's with pruning. That was taken a few years ago. That plant is now from there to here. And if I didn't prune it, it would be on the roof. But I keep it down to about that height. And the more I cut it, the more it flowers. Flowering right through the winter, never stopped flowering. So I have to say, I think, did he send some? Has he supplied some? You've got some?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know that he sent plants to the plant fair, and if you can get your hands on it, do grow it. And it grows in the sun and in the shade. Mine is semi-shade. At Rainy Shore, we've got it in full sun, and we keep it about 1 meter wide and about 1.5 meters high. And it's been there for 5 years now, and they're still looking amazing in the full sun. You can't really see that, so I'll go to the next one. That's the wild pomegranate. Here are the flowers, and the olive sunbirds love it. If you have one of those in your garden, the olive sunbirds will live in it, and other sunbirds. And it can flower right through the summer. It's a small tree. At the coast it can be quite a big tree, but it can, a friend of mine who had it throughout the summer, it never got bigger than that, sort of this height. But it goes from here right up to the berg. It's a must in every garden. That beautiful flower. The wild laburnum can make quite it's a small tree. It's definitely a tree. I'm calling it a shrub because what we're doing now, we're using it quite a lot. We're growing the sand and in the clay, making it multi-stemmed, you get more flowers. And every time you prune it, it will flower again. So it will flower constantly. I've even got one at my house which has seeded itself, and it's got no right to be there. So I don't like lollipops, but we're turning it into a lollipop. It's the only way it can stay there. And every time we prune it, it's just dripping with flowers. It's amazing. So I've learned it long ago. I planted one at one of my husband's crop farms, in a place where it obstructed your view of the crop pens. This was up in St. Lucia. So I said, I'm not taking it out. I just kept cutting it. Every time I cut it, it came back into flower. So remember, if you got one, just prune it, you'll get more flowers. Very pretty. Okay, the Marjangulu. That used to be grown by everybody along the coast as hedges, and we all collected fruit. It's not that often grown. I actually grow it now as a freestanding shrub because I think it's beautiful, and the scent of the flowers is wonderful. So I think it's highly recommended. Whether you want it as a hedge.
Jelly.
Wonderful jelly. My mum used to make a syrup for going on ice cream. We just came down on holiday. We didn't live here. The soapberry. The birds will probably plant it in your garden. I don't know if the nurseries grow. Do the nurseries grow it? You tend, if you live along the coast, the birds will. It's fantastic for moths, butterflies, and birds. It looks like the leaf looks like an Natal mahogany, but it has this long, slender stem and another stem there, so it'll never make a tree, but it's quite attractive. I have to get better pictures of this. It gives you an idea of the many dombeas. You get the spring flowering dombeo tree, which is definitely a tree. I would call this a shrub. It's multi-stemmed. It flowers in autumn, whereas the wild pear flowers in spring. And then you have another one that's just finished flowering now, with the Burgessia, with beautiful bunches of pink flowers. All of them are worth having. I just didn't have other pictures. I like it even when the flower is old. It's still lovely.
If I may, we have those and no one's been buying them.
Oh, 2 years?
We got Burgessia.
You know what? It's what I love about it is you can't fail. It's big bunches of white flowers which hang down below the leaves. It has a small leaf. The leaf is dark green, but it goes a sort of purpley colour. Not everybody likes a purpley colour because they think it's dying. I mean, treat it as an autumn leaf with white flowers. I think it's amazing.
And some of them are red in the middle.
Yes, but that's a different species. That's a shrub, and that grows from cutting. This doesn't grow from cutting. The Burgessia are the ones that are multi-stemmed.
I've got the pink one. That's Burgessia.
Yes, and that you can grow from. I cut it back every year, make lots more. Dracaena, where do you put it if not as a shrub? It isn't a shrub, but you treat it as a shrub. Do you have some on there?
Yes, we do.
I think I saw some. It's an amazing plant. The insects love it. It flowers at night. I mean, the scent at night is strong, but it's a very elegant form plant. So, and it makes a fantastic indoor plant. It takes no sun at all, happily. It grows in deep, dark forest, and we had them in the restaurant at Crop World for 18 years until we got a new manager who threw them all out. But they weren't looked after. We had various managers, nobody looked after them well, and they survived it and looked good. So it's a great plant. It's about, if you don't know it, it grows about that wide, with big rosette, with a leaf about that broad. The pistil bush. Look at the flowers. The pistil bush is normally what I would call late summer flowering. Mine has flowered right through the whole, it started in February and it's still in flower now. I think it didn't know what to do with the funny weather we've had. So it is a forest, it's a deep dark forest plant. It'll grow outside of a forest. It's covered in these big stems of white flowers. It is a big shrub. So you need space, but it's beautiful.
Are you supposed to cut that back? Because mine's really tall.
Cut it back. In my garden, I've got the space, I've left it. But if I put it in, like when at the development where I'm working, I would cut it back. Not every year, probably every second year. Okay, do you have any of these? If anybody has one of these, the dwarf coral tree, keep your seed, because I've grown it from seed to first flower in 1 year. So if you've got one, keep your seed and then give it to friends, because they're not commonly found. The odd nursery has them. I think I bought for Alex Marsh from Corsi, but he might be out by now. It's delightful. In a game reserve, as in Durban, it grew that tall, but not bushy. I gave one to my mother, who was at that stage living on a farm, my sister's farm, and the sheep got into her garden, and they ate it. She eventually had the best one I've ever seen. It sort of went sideways. There would have been 100 flowers. I've never seen such an amazing sight in my life. It's never got more than knee high. I've never managed to do that, but sometimes they get eaten by what do you call it? There's a borer that gets into them, and actually it'll lose the top of the stem. Don't worry, when that happens, it'll branch for you, and you'll get more flowers. But it naturally gets a bunch of about 5 flowers at the top. Amazing plant. Frangelinia, you probably all know Frangelinia. It's commonly used as a hedge. I've never really liked it because it's too commonly used, but actually, if you prune it and you've got a narrow spot, it does very well. And if you want a free plant, it's also good. And it can take any conditions. Yes, you need to go. Yeah.
Excuse me to pick us up to the airport.
Sorry, I'm not looking at the time. I'm just going on.
Let you know not to send.
Okay. So this is the crossberry, also known as wild raisins, is the common name for the bushes. It's a wonderful plant. We have others that have an even bigger pink flower, that get like Lasiocarpa. It's a huge leaf and a much bigger flower. But that's the sort of thing you'd put in a shrubbery. It's not something you put in a bed. It has to be at the back. But fantastic for birds and for insects.
And you prune it as well.
Prune it if you need to.
It's very tall and naked.
No, prune it unless you want it to go, because it is browsed. The animals, antelope love it. So it will be browsed in nature. So just go ahead. Make it fit where you want it, rather than take it out. So this is the river indigo, and a lot of people, some people won't grow it because they say it makes too many babies. Just weed them out. It is such a pretty plant. Mine have got, I've left them growing in my garden and they've reached 4 meters. That's how big they can grow. But in any development with a small garden, we keep them about this high. And those you can also lollipop. And if you don't want to get millions of babies, cut the seeds off before they can make
They
babies.
get lots of seeds.
Yes, but just cut them off.
Lots of seeds.
Yes, but that's the board makes seed, the seed pods. Cut the seed pods off. Then
You
you
do, but it takes a whole
I think it's
morning.
a poor reason not to grow it.
But I like it.
Okay, Macaya Bella, if you have the room. Macaya Bella does make quite a big shrub, but you can manage the size if you've got a smaller garden. You get this wonderful flush of white flowers in spring. But don't do what I do. I do generally prune in May. And 1 year, without thinking, I pruned my Macaya Bella in May. That means no flowers that September. I've got to wait for the next September. So when you prune after flowering. If it's a plant that flowers all year, in your time. But if it's got a particular time to flower, prune after flowering.